The cork flew across the room like a tiny missile bouncing against the chandelier before landing with a dull clink on the marble floor. Laughter followed, high-pitched, triumphant, the kind of laughter that pierces right through the ribs. Crystal glasses rose in the air, champagne spilling over manicured fingers as they toasted. "They finally got rid of her," someone whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Poor thing, walking away with nothing," another chuckled. And then the cruelest sting of all, good riddance. I stood just a few steps away, clutching the divorce papers in my hand. My name was still wet in ink, the final mark that severed me not only from a marriage, but from the illusion that I had ever been part of this family. Their eyes barely touched me. I was already erased. For a moment I wanted to scream, to demand dignity, to remind them of the dinners I had cooked, when their cook left, of the errands I had run, when their drivers called out sick of the loyalty I had given to a family that never considered me their own. But my voice stayed trapped in my chest. Instead I turned. My heels clicked against the stone, each step measured, each step quieter than the roar of their celebration. Behind me, corks continued to fly, champagne foamed, and laughter grew louder. They thought I was defeated. They thought I had nothing left. But silence is deceptive. Silence can be sharper than glass. As the front door closed behind me, the night air swallowed the echoes of their merriment. The winter chill bit into my skin, sharp and cleansing. I inhaled slowly, letting the cold burn through my lungs. In that single breath, I felt a shift not visible yet, but undeniable. Still, the pain lingered. Because this wasn't just about a failed marriage. It was about every dinner where my accent became their punchline, every family trip where I was treated like baggage, every deal where my ideas were claimed as his. This night was the culmination of years of humiliation. And they were right about one thing: I left with nothing. Nothing tangible, at least. No shares, no inheritance, no place in the photographs that lined their hallways. But they didn't see what I carried in silence. Memory, fire, resolve. The cold open lingered in my mind as I replayed the earlier events of that evening. The family gathering had been staged like a victory parade. His mother in her sequined gown had arranged for champagne towers taller than me. His father's cufflinks gleamed under the chandelier. My ex-husband sat with a smirk carved onto his face like an actor who had finally finished his scene. I remembered the moment the papers slid across the table. I could still hear the faint scratch of the pen as I signed my name. That sound so small marked the end of 15 years. "Congratulations," he had muttered coldly, pushing the documents toward his attorney. No hand reached for mine, no acknowledgement of the years I had given, only a smirk and averted eyes. Their celebration started instantly, as though they had rehearsed it. Corks, ready glasses waiting, and me standing there, still breathing, still visible, but already written out of their script. I wanted to walk out sooner, but my legs betrayed me. For one cruel minute I watched them. I studied their faces, the gleam of satisfaction, the collective sigh of relief. They weren't just glad the marriage was over. They were glad I was over. Every face told me I had never been one of them. My mother-in-law's lips curled, almost pitying. My sister-in-law's eyes sparkled like she had won a race. Even the younger cousins smirked, sipping champagne with the practiced cruelty of their elders. I felt myself shrinking, as if the walls were pressing in. I couldn't breathe inside that house anymore. So I left. Outside, the driveway stretched long and gleaming under the porch lights. My car, second-hand, practical, nothing like their polished SUVs, waited at the far end. I paused before stepping down, one last look at the house. The laughter spilled through the windows, careless and sharp. I gripped my coat tighter. My hand brushed against the lining where I had tucked away a small envelope. Inside were letters from my father, written long before he passed. His handwriting uneven, but his words steady. "They may take everything from you, but they cannot take who you are." Never forget that. The tears came then quick and uninvited. Not because I wanted them back, not because I doubted the decision, but because endings always cut even when they free you. A voice in my head whispered, "This silence is not defeat. It is space to rebuild." I stood in that silence. I let it wrap around me, let it hurt, let it heal. And then somewhere in the distance I heard it, the first low hum of engines, not from their cars, not from the street. Deeper, stronger, closer. I didn't know it then, but that sound would rewrite everything. The memory of their laughter didn't end at the driveway. It followed me like a ghost curling into the corners of my mind. I could still hear the champagne fizzing in tall flutes, still see their lips forming cruel little smiles. And the truth was, this wasn't new. That night was simply the loudest chapter in a long book of humiliation. From the very first dinner I attended with his family, I had been an outsider. They lived in a world gilded with old money, legacy, and entitlement, and I was merely me. My background was modest, my parents hard-working but ordinary, the kind of people who saved for years just to take a small vacation. The first insult had been delivered with the faintest smile. His mother had asked, "So which finishing school did you attend?" I answered honestly. "I didn't go to finishing school. I worked part-time through college." Her smile faltered, then sharpened into something brittle. "Ah, practical. Practical." The word had echoed like a label pinned to my chest. Practical meant not elegant. Practical meant not refined. Practical meant not one of us. From then on, everything was an uphill battle. At holidays, I was given tasks no one else wanted: setting the table, carrying heavy dishes, arranging coats. They called it helping out. I called it what it was: servitude dressed in silk. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that in time they would see me for who I was, not where I came from. But years passed, and the sharpness of their judgment only grew. I still remember one birthday dinner crowded with family and acquaintances. His sister raised her glass and announced to my brother, who finally married beneath his station, but managed to stay afloat anyway. The laughter that followed was a dagger cloaked as a joke. I smiled through it, my fingers digging crescents into my palm under the table. I swallowed the sting, convinced that silence was strength, but silence can rot you from the inside. The cruelest blows were always disguised as concern. "Are you sure you're comfortable at this gala? The crowd can be intimidating. Don't strain yourself with business talk. Leave that to the men. We know you're trying, dear, but some people just aren't cut out for this world." Every word dripped with venom coated in honey, and every word I absorbed, because I thought maybe, just maybe, my endurance would earn respect. It never did. My ex-husband, their golden boy, rarely defended me. At best, he laughed it off. At worst, he joined in. Once, when I nervously presented an idea for a small charity initiative at the family's foundation, he smirked and said, "Sweetheart, let the professionals handle this. You stick to what you know." And everyone laughed. That laugh had become a chorus through the years. The same laugh I heard the night of the divorce when they popped champagne. The final straw came months before the papers were signed. It was a family gala dripping with chandeliers and gowns, the kind of event where money wasn't just spent, but displayed. I had chosen a simple dress, navy, tasteful, modest. His mother approached me with her own smile sharp enough to cut glass. "My dear navy, really that shade is dependable? Not quite memorable, but I suppose dependable is your style." The words burned not because they were loud, but because everyone nearby heard them, and they laughed. Always the laughter. That night, I went home and stared at myself in the mirror. My dress, my reflection, my life. It all looked like something borrowed, something unworthy. I whispered to myself, "I don't belong here." And for the first time, the words didn't feel like defeat. They felt like truth. By the time the divorce papers arrived, my heart was numb. I had been stripped piece by piece until only resolve remained. They thought they were ending me by pushing me out. They thought I would vanish quietly into the shadows. And yet, even in that moment of humiliation, a seed had already been planted. I remembered my father's voice years ago when I failed a college exam and cried at the kitchen table. He placed his hand over mine and said, "Sometimes losing in their world is winning in yours. Don't play their game. Build your own." That memory became a spark in the dark. But the humiliation of that final night still clung to me like a heavy coat. I could recall each smirk, each toast, each cruel glance. They had reduced my life, my marriage, my worth to a punchline. I walked out with my head held high, but inside I was crumbling. And yet, in that crumbling, I found a strange kind of clarity. They had underestimated me, they always had. And it was in that underestimation that I would find my strength. Because humiliation, when endured long enough, doesn't just break you, it remakes you. And I was ready to be remade. The echo of laughter still rang in my ears as I walked down that long driveway. Each step was a battle not against them anymore, but against the voice inside me that whispered, "They're right. You have nothing." The night air was sharp, slicing through the silk of my dress. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, but the cold wasn't just outside, it was inside too, in the hollow of my chest where love used to live. The house behind me glowed like a palace, golden light spilling out of windows warm with everything I'd never been allowed to claim. My footsteps on the gravel were small, almost swallowed by the wind, but they were mine. For the first time in years, they were mine. I reached my car, my faithful little sedan parked farthest from the entrance, as though even the driveway itself had ranked us by worth. Its metal was cold when I gripped the handle, grounding me in reality. This was it. No more pretending, no more bargaining, no more waiting for their approval. I sat inside, closing the door, the quiet humming around me. For a moment, I let my head rest against the steering wheel, and the tears finally came. Hot, salty, merciless. They weren't just tears for a failed marriage, they were for every insult I'd swallowed, every smile I'd forced, every part of myself I had shrunk to fit into their picture. I cried until the sobs quieted into tremors, until I could breathe again. And in that silence, I felt something stir. Resolve. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the envelope I always carried. My father's handwriting stared back at me from the crease of the paper. I unfolded the letter, worn and fragile from years of being read. "Dignity is not what others give you, but what you refuse to lose." I traced the words with my fingertip. My father had been a mechanic, hands always scarred with grease, nails never quite clean. He had known humiliation too, customers who looked down on him, wealthy bosses who underpaid him. But he never bowed his head. He carried himself with quiet strength, and he passed that fire to me. "Don't play their game. Build your own," his voice whispered in memory. And suddenly it became clear. That night wasn't the end. It was the doorway. I turned on the engine, the soft rumble filling the silence. I gripped the wheel tighter. "They think I'm gone," I whispered to myself. "But I'm not gone. I'm just getting started." The days that followed were strange, hollow at first. I moved out of the house with its endless rooms and into a small apartment where the heat rattled and the walls were thin. The emptiness was jarring, no art on the walls, no silverware polished to perfection, no servants drifting in and out. Just me, my boxes, and the sound of my own breathing. But there was freedom in it too. I could walk barefoot without judgment. I could eat noodles from the pot without whispers about manners. I could sit at the window for hours and think without someone reminding me of my place. For the first time, my silence wasn't forced. It was chosen. And in that silence, I began to plan. It started small, a notebook filled with scribbles. Ideas that had once been dismissed at their foundation dinners now sprawled across my pages. Community programs, business models, ways to build something sustainable, something that didn't depend on their approval. I spent long nights at the kitchen table, pen in hand, coffee cooling by my elbow. The apartment grew cluttered with sticky notes, half-written plans, budget outlines. I had no investors, no safety net, no inherited fortune. But I had drive. I had clarity. And above all, I had freedom from their chains. I thought back to every time they told me I wasn't capable. Every smirk. Every dismissal. And each time, instead of hurting it, fueled me. Their underestimation became my fire. One evening, while staring at the city lights from my tiny balcony, I whispered aloud, "This isn't about proving them wrong. This is about proving me right." And that distinction mattered. Because if revenge had been my only compass, I would have built something hollow. But if dignity was my guide, then what I created would be unshakable. The loneliness was real, of course. Nights stretched long and memories clawed at me. I'd catch myself recalling his smile the early days before the cracks showed, when I believed love was enough to bridge worlds. Grief would creep in heavy and suffocating. But grief, like humiliation, had a strange alchemy. If you let it, it could turn to steel. And so I carried on. I walked away that night with nothing in my hands. But what they didn't realize was that I walked away with something far more dangerous than wealth. I walked away with vision. And vision once lit cannot be extinguished. The first morning in that tiny apartment, I woke to the sound of pipes clanking in the walls and sunlight slicing through blinds too narrow to block it out. The air smelled faintly of dust and detergent, the kind of scent that clings to old buildings. For a moment, disoriented, I thought I was still in that mansion of polished marble and endless hallways. Then reality pressed in. This was my new life. Small, bare, humble. I sat on the edge of the mattress, surrounded by boxes that looked too large for the narrow bedroom. My life had been compressed into cardboard and tape, stripped of grandeur. There were no maids delivering breakfast trays, no drivers waiting in the garage. Just me, a chipped coffee mug, and the silence of a space that held no memories yet. The silence was intimidating, but it was also liberating. I brewed coffee in a second-hand machine, the bitter smell filling the room like a promise. I leaned against the counter and let the steam rise into my face. "All right," I whispered. "This is where it begins." Starting again wasn't glamorous. I worked from a folding table laptop perched on stacks of books, papers spread everywhere. The old notebooks came alive again, scribbled sketches of programs I had once pitched and been laughed out of the room for. They had called them naive, cute ideas, but I knew better. I knew those ideas had roots. The first few weeks were trial by fire. I called banks trying to secure a loan, but the polite rejection letters piled up. No collateral, too high risk, insufficient history. Their words were daggers dressed in business formality. I knocked on doors, reaching out to contacts I thought were friends. Some never answered. Others gave me the same rehearsed pity. "It's a tough time for everyone. Wish I could help." But I could hear the subtext. "You're done. You're on your own." And maybe I was. But alone didn't mean defeated. I tightened my belt, cut back to the basics. I ate noodles more nights than I could count. I wore the same pair of worn jeans until the seams began to fray. When the heating faltered, I wrapped myself in blankets and kept typing. Because every page of my notebook turned into a plan, and every plan became a small step forward. Then came the first break. It was a gray Wednesday morning, rain tapping the window in restless rhythms. I had just received another rejection email when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen surprised me, Carla, an old colleague from years ago, before I was swallowed into the gilded cage of that family. "I heard what happened," she said, her voice hesitant but warm. "I'm fine," I lied. "No, you're not. But you will be." Listen, I still believe in you. What are you working on? Something cracked open in me, then words spilling out. I told her about the programs, about helping smaller businesses grow, about sustainable community-driven ventures. I told her everything I had been writing alone at my kitchen table. There was silence on the line and my heart sank. But then Carla said, "Send me the draft. I know someone who should see this." That night I sent the draft, hands trembling as I hit send. Weeks passed. More rejection, more late nights. But then another call. Carla again, voice bright this time. "They want to meet you. Tomorrow." The next day, I walked into a modest office with peeling paint and buzzing fluorescent lights. A local nonprofit director sat across from me, her eyes sharp but kind. She flipped through my proposal page by page, then looked up. "This isn't just good," she said. "It's necessary. We can't pay much, but we want to pilot your program." I left that office with a contract worth less than a single handbag my ex-sister-in-law flaunted at parties. But to me, it was priceless. It was proof. Proof that my ideas had weight, that my voice carried beyond their laughter. The work was exhausting. I traveled by bus to meet clients, carried stacks of papers in weathered totes, typed late into the night with my eyes burning. But with every small success, something inside me grew sturdier. Word spread slowly. One project led to another, then another. Each time I reinvested everything, scraping by but moving forward. I learned to celebrate tiny victories: the day I replaced my folding chair with a proper office chair, the first time a stranger emailed me asking for advice, the first dollar I framed on the wall of my little office. Failure lurked, of course. A supplier dropped out under pressure. A potential partner ghosted me when they discovered who my ex-family was. The old humiliation resurfaced in whispers. "She'll never make it." But I had tasted humiliation before, and I knew it couldn't kill me. It only sharpened me. One night, bleary-eyed at my desk, I looked at my father's letter again. "Dignity is not what others give you, but what you refuse to lose." I touched the words, whispering, "I refuse." And in that refusal I found fire. The ashes of my old life still clung to me, but from those ashes something was forming. Something raw, something real, something unstoppable. I wasn't just rebuilding, I was becoming. The rain had turned to sleet. The morning everything shifted. I remember the sting of cold against my cheeks as I carried a stack of folders across the street, shoes slipping on the slick pavement. My little business had been grinding forward in inches, and though exhaustion weighed heavy, I clung to hope. I didn't know that day would mark the first real leap. The nonprofit I'd partnered with months earlier had seen modest success. The pilot program I built for them, helping struggling neighborhood shops streamline their operations, was gaining traction. The small grocers and barbershops we worked with were making more money, saving jobs, keeping doors open. Word had begun to spread in whispers, like a candle flame passed from hand to hand. But whispers weren't enough. I needed a roar. That afternoon, I sat in a cramped conference room, papers spread across a table scratched from years of use. A man in a rumpled suit across from me tapped his pen against my proposal. His name was Leonard, a mid-level manager at a regional grocery chain. He didn't look like the savior of my dreams. He looked tired, overworked, skeptical. "This all sounds ambitious," he said, eyes flicking over my charts. "What makes you think you can pull this off?" I felt the familiar sting of doubt, the echo of my ex-husband's smirk, the memory of champagne bubbles rising in mock celebration of my downfall. But I also felt the fire that humiliation had kindled. "Because I already have," I said firmly. I slid forward testimonies from the small shops, their sales figures, their stories. Because when no one believed in them, they trusted me. And it worked. I'm not asking you to gamble on an idea. I'm asking you to invest in proof. Leonard studied me, his eyes narrowing. The silence stretched so long I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Then slowly, he nodded. "I'll give you one store," he said. "Just one. Show me results in 3 months." It wasn't the contract I dreamed of, but it was oxygen to a drowning woman. The next 3 months were war. I spent every waking moment at that store retraining staff, redesigning systems, setting up new technology with money I didn't have. I slept on buses, ate meals out of vending machines, scribbled notes until my hands cramped. But slowly the numbers began to shift. Waste went down, profits went up, customers returned, and with them, dignity. At the end of the quarter, Leonard called me into his office. He didn't smile much, but this time there was the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. "You did it," he said simply. "We're expanding this to 10 more stores." I left that office lightheaded, the contract clutched in my hand. I stood on the sidewalk staring at the city around me, and for the first time in years I felt the ground solid beneath me. Success snowballed. 10 stores became 20, 20 became 50. My name began appearing in local newspapers. "Former spouse of prominent family builds community business empire," one headline read. They still tied me to him, to them, but the story wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. And of course, with growth came new battles. My ex-in-laws didn't sit quietly. They whispered in boardrooms, spread rumors, pressured suppliers to cut ties with me. Once I arrived at a meeting only to find the chairs filled with stone-faced men who informed me coolly that their family friends had advised against doing business with me. The old humiliation returned, threatening to hollow me out again. But this time I carried armor. I smiled, thanked them for their time, and walked out with my head high. Within a week, another door opened because the results spoke louder than their whispers. Still, there were nights I doubted. Nights when bills piled high and exhaustion pressed down. Nights when I stared at my reflection and wondered if I was fighting a war I couldn't win. But then letters began arriving. Not from banks or lawyers, these came from shop owners, employees, families. "Because of your program, I kept my business. My kids can go to college now. You gave us a chance." I pinned those letters to my office wall, each one a shield against the poison of the past. The true breakthrough came not in a boardroom, but at a small community event in a school gymnasium. Children ran between booths, parents chatted over coffee. I had been invited to speak, but I didn't expect much. As I stepped to the microphone, the crowd quieted. I looked out and saw faces I didn't know, faces that didn't know me as a wife, or an outsider, or a failure. They knew me as someone who had helped them survive. My story began with loss, I told them. With humiliation so sharp it cut me to the bone. But loss is only the first chapter. What you build from it, that's where the story begins. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was real, solid. It filled the hollow spaces that humiliation had carved into me years before. That night, as I walked home, I passed a cafe window where the television played a local news segment. My face was on the screen. The caption read, "From broken to builder, one woman's path to changing the game." I stopped staring at the reflection of myself in the glass. I didn't see the woman who had walked away from the mansion in silence. I saw someone new. And though I knew the war wasn't over, I realized something crucial. I no longer needed to prove them wrong. I only needed to keep proving myself right. The invitation arrived in a thick ivory envelope embossed with gold. Even before I opened it, I knew. The weight of the card, the elegant cursive of my name, it could only come from them. My ex-husband's family. Inside, the words confirmed it. "You are cordially invited to the Whitmore Foundation's annual gala." I almost laughed. They hadn't spoken to me in years except through the whispers of sabotage they wove behind closed doors. Why invite me now? Curiosity, pity? Or was it arrogance, the belief that despite all my efforts, I'd still feel compelled to bask in their light? For a moment I considered tearing the card in half. But then I saw it for what it was: not a trap, but a stage. The very stage where my humiliation had once been performed. And now it was time to reclaim it. The night of the gala arrived, cold and sharp winter wind clawing at the city. Outside the Grand Hotel ballroom, luxury cars purred into the valet line, sleek black sedans, glossy convertibles, the parade of wealth. Cameras flashed as glittering guests descended in gowns that cost more than my first apartment. I didn't come in a borrowed dress this time. My gown was my own, tailored to perfection, deep crimson that whispered power rather than begged for approval. My hair was swept high, my eyes steady. And waiting for me outside, cutting through the line of cars, was the unmistakable thunder of engines. A private jet mine had landed earlier that evening. Its roar still echoed in the minds of those who had seen it glide down on the private strip nearby. News had traveled fast. I hadn't arrived by limo but by sky. As I stepped from my car, the valet's eyes widened. Whispers rippled through the line of guests. Cameras turned. And for the first time, it wasn't about my dress, my manners, or my origins. It was about the undeniable fact I was no longer the outsider. I was the storm. Inside the ballroom, the chandeliers glittered, champagne flowed, and the orchestra swelled with practiced grandeur. And there they were, my former in-laws, clustered near the center like royalty on display. My ex-husband caught sight of me first. His smirk-faltered eyes narrowing as recognition bloomed into something else: wariness. His mother's lips parted in a gasp too quick to disguise. His father's brows knit together in suspicion. I walked toward them, each step deliberate, heels striking the marble floor in sharp rhythm. Conversations dimmed as I passed, heads turning, whispers trailing. "Is that her? She came back. Did you hear she arrived on her own jet?" Their faces turned pale, just as I had always imagined. "Good evening," I said, my voice calm even. "It's been a long time." My ex-husband recovered first, though his smile was stiff. "You look well," he said. His tone carried the same false sweetness I remembered too well. "I am well," I replied, letting the words hang in the air. "Better than ever." His mother clutched her glass tighter, the bubbles trembling. "What brings you here, dear?" Her voice was brittle, like glass ready to shatter. I met her eyes, steady and unflinching. The same thing that brings everyone else: celebration, connection, opportunity. I paused, then added, "Though perhaps for different reasons than before?" Her face stiffened, the meaning clear. I wasn't here to beg to be tolerated, to hover at the edges of their circle. I was here as an equal, or perhaps more than that. The speeches began soon after. The Whitmore patriarch took the stage, his voice booming with pride about legacy and philanthropy. I listened, the words washing over me, echoes of a world I once thought I needed. But when the MC announced me as the next speaker, the room shifted. Yes, they had invited me, but they hadn't expected me to speak. Carla, my old colleague, now a board member in her own right, had ensured it. I stepped onto the stage, the microphone warm under my fingers. A hush spread across the ballroom. "My story isn't one of legacy," I began. "It isn't one of inheritance. It's one of loss, of humiliation, of walking away with nothing and choosing to turn nothing into something." I spoke of the small shops, the workers, the families who had believed in me when no one else had. I told the story of rebuilding from ashes, of programs that grew into chains of lives, saved not by wealth hoarded but by dignity shared. And then I looked directly at them, my former family. "When I left this world behind, you thought I was finished. But you see, some endings are beginnings in disguise. You celebrated my downfall. Tonight, I celebrate something else entirely: the truth that no one defines our worth but us." Applause erupted, real, sustained, alive. Not the polite tapping of crystal glasses, but the clap of hands that believed. As I stepped down from the stage, I caught their eyes once more. My ex-husband looked as though he wanted to speak but found no words. His mother's lips were pressed tight, her glass empty. His father's jaw twitched, silent and sour. Their celebration, their smug certainty, their champagne-fueled triumph that was years ago. Tonight, the roles had reversed. And I hadn't even needed to raise my voice. Later, as I slipped on my coat and prepared to leave, I heard a guest whisper behind me. She didn't just come back. She came back untouchable. I smiled to myself. Not because I had finally beaten them, but because I no longer needed to. They were still playing the same old game. I had already rewritten the rules. The night of the gala ended, but its echo lingered. For days afterward, my phone buzzed with messages, articles, invitations. Rising star, self-made. From cast out to community builder, headlines painted me in colors I had fought for years to deserve. But alone in the quiet of my apartment, I reflected on what mattered. Not the jet, not the gowns, not even the applause. What mattered were the faces of the people I had helped: the grocer who kept his store, the barber who paid off his debts, the single mother who sent her daughter to college because her job endured. That was the legacy worth holding. A week later, I returned to the neighborhood where it had all begun. The old storefronts, once shuttered and lifeless, were open again, windows bright with new signs. Kids laughed on the sidewalks, their shoes scuffing against pavement, their joy unburdened. Inside one shop, the owner waved when she saw me pass, gratitude shining in her smile. This, I thought, is where revenge transforms. It stops being about them and becomes about everyone else. I remembered the words I had once whispered to myself in that tiny apartment. This isn't about proving them wrong. This is about proving me right. Now, standing among the people who had built alongside me, I understood just how right that was. Still, there were nights when the old pain returned, memories of laughter at my expense, of cruel words said in glittering halls. But instead of letting the memories hollow me, I let them remind me. They reminded me of what silence taught me, of what resolve built in me, of what ashes can become when you choose not to scatter, but to shape them into something new. Humiliation had been my teacher, loss had been my forge, and now dignity was my crown. Years from that first night, I stood on a different stage, not a gala, but a community center we had built with the profits from my company. The walls smelled faintly of fresh paint, balloons floated near the ceiling, and children clutched new backpacks donated through our program. As I looked out at the crowd, I thought about the mansion, the laughter, the champagne. They had toasted to my ending. Yet here I stood surrounded by beginnings. I raised my glass of sparkling water, simple, clear, unpretentious. They celebrated when I lost it all. I told the crowd, my voice steady. They cheered when I walked away with nothing. But here's the truth: sometimes losing everything is the very thing that sets you free. And when you are free, you can build not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. The applause rolled through the room, warm and real. That night, walking out of the center under the streetlights, I finally felt peace. The mansion lights no longer haunted me. The echo of their laughter no longer pierced me. Because I had built a new chorus, one made of gratitude, dignity, and voices lifted together. I didn't need to watch their faces turn pale anymore. My triumph wasn't in their downfall. My triumph was in rising and in lifting others as I rose. To you listening now, maybe you've known humiliation. Maybe you've walked away from something or someone with empty hands and a heavy heart. Maybe people have laughed at your silence, toasted to your loss. Hear me when I say their laughter is not your ending. Your silence can be your beginning. Walk away even if it's with nothing, especially if it's with nothing, because sometimes nothing is the cleanest slate you'll ever be given. And when you rise, and you will, you'll discover that the sweetest victory isn't in watching others fall. It's in knowing you built something so strong, so real, that no one can take it away. Raise your own glass. Celebrate your own survival. And remember, you are not defined by what they give or take from you. You are defined by what you choose to create. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it tonight. Subscribe, reflect, pass it on. Because every ending carries the seed of a beginning, and maybe this story is the seed you've been waiting for.